I wasn't originally gonna review this episode as part of Cartoon Crisis 3 after uploading 2 Cartoon Crisis 3 videos for this month, especially a week before Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon arrives next Thursday. I was originally going to include this episode as my Loud House sequel project video from the Lincoln Loud video that I've made nearly 2 years ago. My original plan for today's upload was supposed to be my review of the Loud House's Yes Man. Well, it may be a great episode, but over time it hasn't aged due to the show's future and the fanbase's critiques towards the characters. Which is why I ended up deleting all the progress that I made because I wasn't proud of it, and it gave me the idea of doing this review instead. I've wanted, and I do mean wanted to review this episode for so many times, but ended up dropping out at the last minute because it just didn't feel like the right time, and how so much criticism towards this episode has been bottling up my stress, and how the entire show itself isn't the problem on its own anymore. This is a long time coming, and if people don't agree with me, then it needs to be addressed. This is my review of House Flip from the Loud House. The premise of the episode is that the Loud kids are on warning after the many times they ran Vanzilla into multiple objects, causing scratches and bends on it, and they will have their driving privileges suspended indefinitely, which didn't last long. Once they bumped into the roof of the building, collapsing it on Flip with multiple injuries, and they need to make sure that their parents don't find out about what really happened, otherwise they won't have their driving privileges. Every time I looked up involving the critiques of this episode, I do see some positives, but the negativity centering around this episode of how it's being bashed to oblivion, even more so like King to the Con, I really can't be able to take much more of this, because with this episode being 4 years old and witnessing so many problems involving the Loud House and the critiques involving the fandom itself, I couldn't be able to look at the characters the same way again, all from this episode alone. It may be difficult to believe that in other episodes it could have happened with Brawl in the Family, No Such Luck, and even the later episodes, but this episode was around the time where the Loud House fandom had the remaining fans while they watched the first 3 seasons, and then once they reached to this season, they claim it as the worst season. This really made it difficult for me to process, mainly from this episode alone, because Season 4 summarizes of how much I can't be able to look at the episodes entirely from the Loud House, because of how the fans from the fanbase are claiming to be better than the characters from this episode, which is hard to believe. But when I watched the Loud House critics' review of this episode, I enjoyed it at first, but over time, after watching the later seasons, that review wasn't really the best, and it was way too harsh when it comes to literally everything else. The thing is that the problem that people have with episodes like this is mainly the fact that the characters don't remember anything that they did in the past. Mainly learning from morals that they can improve on their characters, which, for me personally, morals are mostly non-existent when it comes to the Loud House, due to today's standards of witnessing multiple situations, getting more stressed out while understanding the point of view of others, not remembering a lot from their past mistakes. As in, not being able to learn every single moral while trying so much to do a different route that people are still going against, mainly the fan base who didn't like the idea of the Loud kids taking Flip to the house, which at the same time, they also didn't like Flip whatsoever, and when they side with Flip in this episode with him blackmailing the characters, and they say that Flip is the best character, which is a bad thing involving the Loud characters, that is the most over-exaggerating, overly harsh criticism, knowing full well that being better than other people isn't really the answer or the biggest problem of the episode anymore. Look, when I say material like this, it only applies to some shows, mainly The Loud House itself. There's a reason onto why I haven't been critical when it comes to episodes like this and the characters themselves in some occasions, because even if I may been a little too critical towards the Loud sisters, in this episode, even if what they did is difficult to defend, at the same time, I really feel like that people are way too over-exaggerating on the fact that they claim this as one of the worst episodes from Season 4, when in reality, when it comes to the idea of Steam Team WK mentioning the timeline being out of whack because these episodes could be taking place during Season 5 or during Season 3 or even in Season 1, it literally makes everything unfocused and difficult to take anything seriously, all the while just mainly stomping the Loud House to the ground than it already have multiple times. Believe me, whenever I experience this type of stuff, they are trying to make this a lot more serious in comparison to the downfall of the 30-Odd Parents and other shows, as if they wanted to stomp this show way more than the SpongeBob from the post-movie era. And sitting through this episode from beginning to end, it sums up a lot that this episode was really at a bad place at a bad time, all the while that the execution of the episode didn't help anyone, knowing full well that people were just expecting too much, and yet at the same time when they get an episode like this, they just instantly go way too over the top on this being the worst episode when it comes to the characters not remembering their lessons. And it really gave me the indication that this is pretty much the reason onto why we barely get Lincoln and Sisters episodes that much in the later seasons. While we ended up getting the Lincoln and Freckle Gang, or I'm just gonna call it Lincoln and Friends Gang episodes, a lot more in Season 5 and onwards. To be perfectly real with you guys, every single character in this episode isn't being portrayed in a negative light, because whenever you have an episode where the characters ended up doing the same things again and again, and this led to them fighting with each other, which led to a huge accident, it really feels like that you're clearly trying way too hard in order to make this episode worse than it already is. And to tell you the truth, there are only 5 characters who actually caused the incident towards Flip. Luna, Lenny, Lisa, Lucy, and Lori, who are fighting on picking a radio to listen to music, and it led to the incident. Usually, I would understand on the fact that this led to so many problems of the characters putting themselves into these situations to begin with, but if you really think of how all this is a way for me to see that these characters should have wearing headphones or earmuffs is one thing, but believe me, the fact that the episode itself is not even showcasing the characters' intelligence, all the while that the fans are bashing it way too harshly, it makes me feel less sympathy towards Flip, because Flip is the one character the characters are taking care of. People who've been defending Flip's character say that despite being hateable in this episode, he's a more likable character than the other characters, mainly the fact that the characters are stupid, including the Loud parents, which we're gonna be getting to later, but like I said, he just isn't the right character in this scenario when it comes to him blackmailing the other characters, because after many times when it comes to his antics, it's difficult to feel sympathy towards him, especially when it comes to his backstory on how he's the way he is in this show. I'll admit I did defend him when it comes to my take of this episode in my Lincoln Loud video, but the more I look at this episode and the critiques centering around it, it really sums up on the fact that he can't be able to be sympathetic for how he's being portrayed in a different scenario while he's basically the Sergio of the Loud House before Sergio became a character. He ends up going to different places in the building during nighttime, all the while putting the characters into more harm, which really sums up in the fact that if you're still going to see him as the most likable character, then you're clearly ignoring literally everything else when you're literally bashing on the Loud Sisters and Lincoln way too much. And when I'm defending the Loud Sisters, it's really saying something that I see them in a more normal light, even though that they ended up using Lincoln's room for Flip to sleep in. The thing is that the characters, despite what they did, mainly half of them, they're willing to take care of Flip for the sake of showing their respect towards him despite everything that he did towards them. There are too many alternative routes for the characters to pick, and to tell you the truth, you're not giving them a route to pick when it comes to the predicament that they got themselves into, even if you can find the most ridiculous route imaginable. Because just by witnessing these characters going through so much in this episode, and this leads to them getting into a negative light from the fan base, it really made me see that the people were way too harsh towards this episode, to where I can't be able to see any of the Loud Sisters, including half of them, in a negative light. The idea of having a different character taking the role of Flip in this episode, well, making sure that the episode is well written, is Mr. Grouse, because in all honesty, seeing him in this position would have made me feel more sympathy towards him, even though that the theme of his character is mainly being the grumpy neighbor, which does fit his character, but judging of how Flip is portrayed in this episode, it's just difficult to pick different choices and picking both of them when it comes to the direction that they took with Flip, all the while siding with Flip, which in all honesty, it's way too difficult for me to see Flip in a better light when there's so much going on that you might as well just assume that if anyone is willing to put the foot down for the sake of just ending all of this madness, then you're basically becoming like Brawl in the Family, where there's no actual thinking. And for me personally, even if it's a little over-exaggerating, that is a lot more worse than the episode itself. Let's get into the parents of the episode who were being way too harsh towards the Loud kids when it comes to causing so many incidents involving Vanzilla, only to reveal that They're the ones who crashed Vanzilla in the past, while also claiming to be great parents, all the while leaving Lily outside on the porch. This is the biggest example of having too much going on at once, all the while having a liar reveal that, let's be real, the Loud Test critic have been over-exaggerating the liar reveal thing to the point that he's just hating this episode way too much that it makes his point of view way too harshly that it wouldn't even kill him to actually be civilized. To get this out of the way on me thinking that the parents were way too harsh even though what they say is really important, it's not because they were hypocrites. If anything, it just feels like that they're trying to showcase the parents in a goofier light by being hypocrites, but even if you look at it on its own and not being way too problematic, it really feels like they're trying to make them a lot more aggressive and serious when in season 4, it really feels like there's no point to showcase their strictness. And people critiquing them, let's be real, there are a lot of examples of them being a lot more worse when it comes to them being neglectful, and the fact that they're willing to lay down the law and the fact that people are still criticizing them, you're not even giving them the third option that you refuse to give them, as in what they should have done to begin with, and I'm pretty sure that if you get something from them, you will probably not like it. It may be when it comes to execution, but if it was done properly, you would still complain. Getting into the topic of Lily, who ended up becoming the best character in the entire episode, who isn't even the main character and only appears briefly, and it's mainly the fact that she's been abandoned by her parents on the front porch. I have to admit, I can understand where people are coming from, but with her being the best character, she barely did anything in the episode. Like, if one character who doesn't contribute much ends up becoming a better character than the other characters, it's not convincing me whatsoever. Like, I've already addressed the half of the Loud sisters cause Flip's injuries, and if you really think that the other half of the Loud kids deserve to be held accountable for their actions, then you're clearly not even setting an actual example of a scale on which character is the better overall in comparison to the other. And with that argument happening in other bad episodes, it was one thing in bad episodes when it was a completely different setting and execution. But when it comes to this episode, it really feels like everyone being put in the negative light has been hammering in way too hard to the point that it's not even proper criticism or even high levels of Brawl in the Family or No Such Luck or The Greenhouse or any of the bad episodes criticisms, because at least I can understand that those characters in those episodes were done terribly. But whenever I look into this episode from beginning to end, these characters at least try to make the right when it comes to the wrong that they caused. And throughout the rest of the episode, they never argue with each other. They did inside of Vanzilla, but after that, when they caused the injury to Flip, mostly half of them, they're getting along, which is something that they did. And when it comes to them not being cooperative when it comes to the stuff that they're trying to help out Flip, then to be perfectly real with you, there are different alternative routes for people like the Loud characters that can't be able to be adjustable towards. Like, if you were going to do if you're going to do something similar with the Loud kids, like mainly helping someone out, and it's a lot more difficult in comparison to the other things that these characters did, then it really sums up that this is basically a new for them by taking care of Flip over the accident that really is a lot more over-exaggerating. Well, that accident happening on Mr. Grass would have made this episode a lot more better. Granted, not making an episode superior by making every single character better, but at the same time, it would have been tolerable to sit through. And the direction would have been a lot more better since that Mr. Grouse wouldn't cause any of the incidents that Flip did, which is why I barely feel sympathy while he covers for the Louds in order to have the punishment of the driving privileges being taken away towards the end of the month. If he was fully regretful, he wouldn't done anything in this episode, to the point that him being sympathetic is basically all gone when he caused everything terrible for the Louds. And the whole, I think that's a you problem when he took that from a character from season 2. Let's be real with you. I really feel like that for being sympathetic towards Flip is a lot more difficult nowadays, considering that his portrayal in the Christmas episode didn't do him much of favors, considering that afterwards he ends up becoming the same greedy character like he was in the past, and the only closest that actually work is mainly his dating episode from season 6. Considering that he ends up getting injured by Lynn and Rita, I need to ask, what is the point for him to blackmail Lynn and Rita, all the while that Lynn and Rita are hiding this behind the kid's back? Because this isn't irony, this is just raises more questions rather than more frustration when it comes to the hypocrisy. This just sums up everything that this episode has been overhated and so bashed, to the point that someone needs to address this right away, because this has been a long time coming, and I really feel like that every time I think about this episode and how 4 years that have passed, this really feels like that the fanbase gets a negative light for how they hammer in, for how they're trying to make this episode worse than it already is. Like, I do want to critique more bad Loud House episodes, but for how this show has aged and how the fanbase just gets a lot more worse as each episode comes out or each material that comes out, I'm mostly focusing on the fanbase rather than the product itself, because it's getting really, really old. Like, I can instantly get through the fanbase's criticisms when it comes to other bad shows like SpongeBob, because, let's be real, post-movie era is what made me see the walls in SpongeBob that it's difficult for me to get into. But when it comes to the Loud House, I can still get into the product regardless. And after thinking about the fanbase and when it comes to the opinions towards episodes, consider this as a preview for the future Loud House project, which is the sequel towards my Lincoln Loud video. In my future project, not only am I going to be talking about the bad episodes, but also the critiques towards the bad episodes when it comes to the fanbase. Mainly, the people have been bashing on the newer episodes to the point that they're literally making the Loud House a punching bag rather than a show worth of critiquing out of. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's becoming more of a punching bag than how SpongeBob was the punching bag during the post-movie era. Well, for me personally, I really feel like that even if this show would improve, people would still not get over it, and can guarantee that they will probably make sure that they're better than the characters in this, even though the characters don't exist. Yes, people have critiqued characters and you use their sanities in other media, but for a Nickelodeon cartoon, it really feels like that it's the easiest target to hammer in on the hate, even more than Teen Titans Go. There are fairly good critique people involving this show, but when it comes to people like the Loud House critic, there are way too many, and after the many times I talk about the Loud House critic, it's really obvious that he's gonna block me, but if he's willing to sit through this entire video and actually comment down below, then maybe I would have respect for him if he actually responds civilly. When it comes to this episode, it's still not good, but for me personally, I don't see this as one of the worst episodes of Season 4. Like, I would view the other episodes from Season 4 a lot more worse, and it really feels like that this was at a time where people were just getting sick of the Loud House and either moving on, but even if they're willing to do so, there's literally no reason to bash this episode now. Like, it was one thing in May of 2020 when this came out, but nowadays it really feels like that. Looking back at this episode, there are so many problems, but after witnessing future episodes, Time Trap is literally the episode that made the characters a lot more worse than how they were in this. If there's one thing that Time Trap did worse than House Flip, is that they made the characters too dumbed down when it comes to them messing up with the timeline. And in all honesty, some of them deserve to be disappeared for being way too blind, and even if they never saw any time travel related media before, it really sums up that that should have been a Lisa episode rather than a Loud Siblings episode. Anyway, I'm really thankful that I finally talked about this episode, and to tell you the truth, if people are going to bring up morals in the comments, let me just be real with you. When I make that video, I'm going to describe how morals are just not really the answer to everything when it comes to the Loud House. This isn't my low point for Each of His Magic, even if you never watched that show. I'm giving this episode a 3 out of 10, but I'm not done with the Loud House just yet. On Sunday, Father's Day is arriving, and I'm going to be taking a look at the Season 1 episode of the Cross of Gone Days, which I'm going to keep anonymous. After that, Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon would take center stage on my YouTube channel through the majority of the summer. I'll see you guys on Sunday.